For years, almost everyone believed artificial intelligence was simply a software revolution, a story about chatbots, code, and clever algorithms running quietly inside a screen. Instead, artificial intelligence is becoming one of the biggest new consumers of electricity in the United States, forcing utilities, grid operators, and energy companies to rethink how the entire American power system will work for the next decade. That is not a metaphor. It is a physical, measurable shift happening right now in substations, transmission lines, and power plants across the country, and it is starting to touch something every single American already worries about: the monthly electricity bill. This story is not just about technology companies chasing the next breakthrough. It is about every American household, because the same electrical grid that keeps your refrigerator running, your air conditioner humming in July, and your lights on at night is now being asked to support one of the fastest industrial expansions in modern history. Somewhere near you, in a state you might not expect, massive buildings full of computer chips are pulling electricity at a scale that used to be reserved for steel mills and aluminum smelters. And the question that keeps grid planners awake at night is simple: can the system keep up? Before we go further, let's be honest about what we actually know, because this topic gets exaggerated constantly online. There is no definitive proof right now that artificial intelligence has already raised electricity bills nationwide for the average American family. That claim would be too simple, and frankly, it would be wrong. What is true, and what utilities, grid operators, and independent economists broadly agree on, is something more nuanced. Artificial intelligence is already changing how electricity is planned, how infrastructure money is spent, and how demand is distributed across specific regions of the country. Whether that translates into higher bills for you depends on where you live, how fast the grid expands, and decisions regulators haven't even made yet. So here is the central question we are going to sit with for the rest of this story. Could artificial intelligence eventually change how much ordinary Americans pay for electricity? To answer that, we need to follow the chain of cause and effect one link at a time, starting with something almost nobody was thinking about 5 years ago: the sheer physical hunger of modern computing. Training a large artificial intelligence model is not like running a word processor. It requires thousands of specialized computer chips working around the clock inside massive facilities called data centers. These are not the modest server rooms companies used 20 years ago. Today's data centers built for artificial intelligence workloads are industrial complexes, sometimes covering the footprint of dozens of football fields, packed with machines that generate so much heat they require their own dedicated cooling systems and their own dedicated power substations. Here is the first link in the chain. The artificial intelligence boom has triggered an explosion in data center construction across the United States. Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Nvidia, along with newer players like OpenAI and Anthropic, are not building one or two of these facilities. They are building dozens, in coordinated waves, often announcing plans that used to take a decade to complete, but are now being demanded in 2 or 3 years. Grid planners call this unprecedented. Utility executives in public filings and interviews have used the same word over and over again: unprecedented. That explosion in construction leads directly to the second link in the chain: a massive and sudden increase in electricity demand. Regions that spent decades with flat, predictable electricity growth are now watching demand curves bend sharply upward. Northern Virginia, often called the data center capital of the world, has seen so much growth that local utilities have had to fundamentally rewrite their long-term planning assumptions. Texas, Georgia, and Oregon are seeing similar patterns, with data center campuses becoming some of the largest single electricity customers in their entire state. To understand the scale here, forget percentages for a moment and think about size. Imagine a single data center campus that consumes as much electricity as a mid-sized American city. That is not an exaggeration. Some of the largest artificial intelligence-focused data center campuses currently under construction are expected to draw power equivalent to entire metropolitan areas once they are fully operational. That is the kind of load a utility used to plan for over 20 years. Now they are being asked to plan for it in 24 months. Which brings us to the third link in the chain: utilities investing billions of dollars to keep up. When a single customer suddenly needs as much power as a city, the utility serving that area cannot simply flip a switch. It has to build new transmission lines, new substations, and in many cases, secure new sources of electricity generation altogether. Across the country, utility companies have been quietly revising their capital investment plans, and the words data centers and hyperscale customers keep appearing again and again in the documents filed with state regulators. This is where the fourth link becomes impossible to ignore: grid expansion. Building new transmission lines is not fast, and it is not cheap. It can take years to get permits, secure land, and physically construct high voltage lines capable of carrying the kind of power an artificial intelligence campus requires. In some regions, the demand from data centers has jumped so far ahead of the available infrastructure that grid operators have had to prioritize which projects get connected first, creating long waiting lists known in the industry as interconnection queues. And here we reach the fifth link, the one that finally starts to touch your wallet: higher infrastructure costs. Building new power lines, new substations, and new generation capacity costs real money, and that money has to come from somewhere. In a regulated electricity market, the costs of grid upgrades are often spread across all customers on the system, not just the new industrial customer that triggered the need for the upgrade. This is where economists start to disagree, and it is worth sitting with that disagreement honestly instead of picking a side for dramatic effect. Some analysts and grid experts argue that without careful regulatory intervention, ordinary residential customers could end up subsidizing infrastructure built primarily to serve massive artificial intelligence data centers. Other experts push back, arguing that many of these agreements include contracts requiring the data center companies themselves to pay for a significant share of the infrastructure they require, which would limit or even eliminate any spillover cost onto regular households. Both sides are represented in the current debate among economists and regulators, and neither has been definitively proven right nationwide. This finally brings us to the sixth link, the one this entire documentary has been building toward: a possible future impact on consumers. Several independent analysts, including firms that specialize in wholesale electricity markets, have modeled scenarios where continued rapid growth in artificial intelligence electricity demand could push wholesale prices upward by a significant margin in the specific regions most affected, sometimes by estimates in the range of 20 to 30% by the end of the decade, if grid upgrades fail to keep pace. Other researchers argue that improvements in computing efficiency, smarter scheduling of data center workloads, and long-term power purchase contracts could largely offset that pressure, keeping the impact on everyday households much smaller than the most dramatic headlines suggest. Now here's the detail almost nobody outside the energy industry has been talking about, and it might be the most revealing fact in this entire story. At least one major artificial intelligence company has already publicly acknowledged that this concern is real enough to act on. Anthropic, one of the leading developers of advanced artificial intelligence systems, has offered in some cases to directly cover electricity price increases for local communities affected by the power demands of its own operations. Think about what that actually means. A company building some of the most advanced artificial intelligence technology on the planet is essentially admitting, through its own actions, that its infrastructure could raise electricity costs for the neighbors living near its data centers, and it is choosing to get ahead of that backlash before regulators or the public forces the issue. That is not speculation from an outside critic. That is a company voluntarily putting its own money behind an admission that this problem is worth solving proactively. When the companies driving a trend start writing checks to offset its side effects, that tells you something about how seriously the risk is being taken behind closed doors, even while the public conversation is still arguing about whether the risk is real at all. Let's clear up a few misconceptions that keep circulating, because separating fact from noise matters here. The first misconception is that artificial intelligence is purely a digital phenomenon with no physical footprint. In reality, every image generated, every chatbot response, every large model being trained requires real electricity flowing through real wires into real machines sitting in real buildings. The second misconception is that this demand is spread evenly across the country, when in fact it is highly concentrated in a handful of regions, which is exactly why some communities are feeling the pressure, while others notice nothing at all. The third misconception is that efficiency improvements in computer chips will simply cancel out the growth in demand. History does not support that assumption. Even as chips get more efficient, companies have consistently used that efficiency to build bigger, more powerful systems rather than to reduce total energy consumption, a pattern energy researchers have observed for decades in other industries. What surprised even seasoned grid planners the most was not that artificial intelligence needed electricity. Everyone understood that on some level. What surprised them was the speed. Utilities that normally plan capacity additions over 10 or 15-year horizons suddenly found themselves negotiating with technology companies demanding power delivery in 2 or 3 years, a timeline that traditional utility infrastructure was simply never designed to accommodate. That mismatch between how fast technology companies move and how slowly physical infrastructure can be built is, in many ways, the real story hiding underneath all the headlines about artificial intelligence and electricity. There is also a deeper contradiction sitting at the heart of this entire narrative, and it deserves to be said plainly. Most people expected artificial intelligence to be a revolution confined to software, cloud computing, and clever apps on a smartphone. Instead, its rapid growth has forced a direct confrontation with one of the oldest, most physical, most heavily regulated industries in the country, the electricity grid. Software was supposed to be weightless. It turns out at scale, it needs steel towers, copper wire, and gigawatts of real power, just like any other heavy industry ever built in America. So where does that leave the average person reading their electricity bill next month? Here is the most important thing to understand. There is no guarantee that your bill will rise because of artificial intelligence, and there is no guarantee that it will not. It depends heavily on where you live, whether your local utility negotiates strong contracts requiring data center companies to pay their fair share of infrastructure costs, and how quickly new power generation comes online to meet the new demand. Regulators in several states are actively debating new rules right now specifically designed to prevent residential customers from absorbing costs that should belong to large industrial customers like data centers. The outcome of those regulatory battles, happening state by state, will likely determine far more about your future bill than any single artificial intelligence breakthrough ever could. Now here's a question worth sitting with, because it does not have an easy answer. If artificial intelligence keeps advancing at its current pace, and the electricity demand keeps climbing with it, are American utilities and regulators actually capable of building the grid fast enough to keep prices under control? Or is the country walking into an infrastructure bottleneck it is not fully reckoned with yet? Some experts believe the market will adapt smoothly, the way it has adapted to previous waves of industrial electricity demand throughout American history. Others believe this wave is different, faster, more concentrated, and more disruptive than anything the grid has faced before. Reasonable, informed people disagree on this, and that disagreement itself tells you how early we still are in understanding where this all leads. If you want to stay ahead of what is coming next in this industry before it shows up as a surprise on your own utility statement or in the price of your next car, join us here. To not be caught off guard by what is coming next in this industry, join us.